Last time we spoke about the harrowing tale of what could be one of the most evil leaders in human history, depending of course which sources you read about him. Indeed, Xianzhong, regardless if he was fully, half, or less guilty of the crimes against humanity laid against his name, has gone down in Chinese history as a significant figure. The people of Sichuan underwent a horror, and it would take 2 full centuries for Sichuan to regain its lost population. Thus, with the fall of Xianzhong, Li Zicheng and countless South Ming claimants to the throne, who was left for the remnants of the former to rally around? Well, one of the self-proclaimed emperors to the South Ming regime was still alive and fleeing. Emperor Yongli now had an opportunity to harness the scattered Dashun, Daxi, and Ming Loyalists to his cause. This episode is the flight and fight of Emperor Yongli. Hey, welcome back to the Fall and Rise of China podcast, and I'm your dutiful host, Craig Watson. But before we can begin, I just wanted to remind you all that this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Perhaps you want to learn a bit more about the history of Asia? Kings and Generals has an assortment on episodes on the history of Asia and much, much more, so go give them a look over at YouTube. So please, subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube and continue to help us produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. And hey, if after all that you were still hungry for some more History of Asia content, why don't you check out my personal channel, the Pacific War channel, over at YouTube, where I cover the history of China and Japan going as far back as the Opium Wars of the 1800s, all the way up to the end of the Pacific War in 1945. Give it a look, it'll mean a lot to me. Well, after a rather horrifying episode dedicated just to Xianzhong's regime in Sichuan, we now come back to the South Ming regime. Now, while Xianzhong was busy turning Sichuan into a literal cemetery, the South Ming Loyalists were engaging in a life-or-death struggle for central and southeast China. A series of Ming claimants to the Dragon Throne had risen and fallen. Li Zicheng and Xianzhong are both dead, leaving their Dashun and Daxi followers in a power vacuum to be swallowed up by mere banditry, or perhaps defect to the Qing or Ming. As for the largest victims, the common people, they were once again caught in the middle, soon to be subjugated to war, famine, and general hardship. As one scholar once put it, the long conquest of central and south China required armed struggle in county after county, community after community, forcing countless people to face the grim choices on their own doorsteps. When the Qing took Beijing, they faced multiple enemies. Li Zicheng fled west, and the South Ming regime sprang up in the south. It meant that the Qing would be forced to divide their forces, resources, and attention. But their enemies were not only not cooperating, they were full on fighting another. Hell, the South Ming regime was arguably fighting another more than the Qing at some points. It made sense to take out Li Zicheng first, of course. He was an easier target since the Qing had just smashed his army, and there was a bonus of looking like they were avenging the regicide of Emperor Yongli. In the meantime, the South Ming regime was killing itself, allowing the Qing to kick the door to the rotting structure, and soon a bunch of South Ming self-proclaimed emperors were defeated one by one. Yet, when they got to Emperor Yongli, well, he just kept fleeing. Then they diverted their attention to Xianzhong. They took him out, probably for the betterment of all humanity. Now, so many remnants of the Dashun, Daxi, and other Ming loyalist military groups and other bandit armies were still roaming around everywhere. Many warlords sprang up, taking control over them. What would happen if someone began to win over all of these free chess pieces, so to say, to their side of the war? Now we are going back to Emperor Yongli's situation. As I had mentioned 2 episodes ago, Qi had argued with Emperor Yongli that they needed to make a stand, and one would be made at Guilin. Qi Shishi said to the emperor, "If you want to defend Yue, you should stay in Yue. If you want to abandon Yue, then Yue will be imperiled. If we take one step forward, then the people will take one step forward. But if we flee far away in a single day, the people will also flee far in a day. If we run, then we cannot defend our territory. How can we attract people to our cause?" Well, Emperor Yongli fled regardless for the fourth or fifth time. I actually lost count at this point. Qi Shishi stayed behind at Guilin in the end. Qi Shishi understood the necessity not to abandon cities so easily so as to rally more forces to the cause. He had seen the previous South Ming regimes collapse because they had abandoned bases too swiftly, undermining their cause. Qi Shishi was accompanied by Jia Lian, and they would defend Guilin from multiple Qing attacks in April and June of 1647. During the first assault, Cao had led the defense of the city, facing greater numbers and having lesser firearms at his disposal. Despite the deficiency in firearms, Cao's forces defended Guilin using sword and bow to great effect. Several hundred Qing mounted cavalry archers charged Guilin and pelted the defenders with arrows, one of them striking Cao. But he kept fighting, and he held the south gate against the invaders. This inspired his troops, and soon they charged out of the south gate against the Qing force, smashing many of the troops of the Red Banner. The Qing were forced to flee, and Zhao's men chased them, killing thousands. Eventually, Zhao and his men went too far, and then they were surrounded and outnumbered by the Qing, who wheeled around them. It is said, Zhao screamed and struck the invaders with his spear, raining blood and flesh all over as he and his men hacked their way out of the encirclement. They fought for some miles, just a force of 300 men against thousands, but they managed to get back to Guilin. This minor victory prompted Qi and Zhao to stress the tactical and strategic importance of Guilin, and Wu Zhou urging Emperor Yongli to return and make Guilin a base of operations. Meanwhile, Emperor Yongli was being escorted by Liu Changyi, an ambitious career military man who is nicknamed the Iron Club, who protected him in western Kuang. For 3 months, no rations were delivered to Guilin, and when the Qing learnt about its supply issues, well, they attacked again, this time at the Wenchang Gate. Zhao charged against the enemy, covered by some western cannons given to him by some Catholic missionary friends. The cannons cut the Qing forces to ribbons, killing hundreds as Cao charged out to fight them in the field. The fighting raged on for 2 days with the cannons never stopping, and although the Qing regrouped to attack again, they were smashed so badly they had to form a retreat, being pursued yet again by Cao's forces, losing thousands of men. For this victory, Cao was made military commissioner-in-chief of the left, military superintendent of Guangxi, and the Earl of Xining. Lue Iron Club Changyin, it seems, had been holding Emperor Yongli under house arrest at Wugang the entire time, and this began to look really bad. In May of 1647, the Qing captured Baoqing, and in a series of battles defeated Liu Changyin. Emperor Yongli barely was able to escape, sometimes only being just a few miles ahead of the Qing scouts. Emperor Yongli made his way through the Guni Pass to Liaozhou, but soon he had to reroute to Xianzhong. By this point, locals were shooting arrows at the royal barge. Not a good look. After constant urging by Qi Shishi, Emperor Yongli finally decided to return to Guilin by the end of 1647. In the meantime, the Qing found they were having a very hard time pacifying southern and western Kuang province. It held very rough terrain and a large number of enemies. Bandit groups were operating along both land and water in large numbers ranging from hundreds to thousands. To make matters worse, bandits had multiple spies working within the Qing, giving them warning of their movements, allowing them to hide in the mountains and forests when needed. Han bannerman Liu Xiaojin argued that despite their victories, the enemy would always escape their clutches via the mountains. The Qing, like their Ming counterparts, were having the exact same problems dealing with the confrontations with wandering bandits, particularly in the rugged border country between provinces. Qing officials complained repeatedly of ambushes and mountain passes, and they always had heavy casualties. There were also reports that such ambush attacks were making common cause with the Ming Loyalists, and that certainly was concerning. The Qing were beginning to realize that the Ming could offer legitimization to bandit groups and use them to wear the Qing down. In autumn of 1647, after the Qing attacked Yongzhou, after just 10 days of combat, the Ming suddenly charged out of the city and pushed the Qing to flee near Quanzhou, where they managed to defeat the Qing commander Geng Zhongming, forcing him to flee for miles. This was considered the first military triumph of Emperor Yongli's regime. By early 1648, the Qing seized Quanzhou and managed to defeat some Ming forces near Guilin, who routed. The forces who had routed ended up fleeing to Guilin, and they quickly set about looting the city before further fleeing. Qi remained stern as some of his fellow Ming commanders looted, burned, and fled Guilin as the situation was deteriorating. Guilin soon fell into a mutiny as the city was engulfed in flames. Qi refused to leave his post but was wounded and had to leave the city by river eventually. When the Qing prince Zi'er Halang heard of the problem in Guilin, he seized the opportunity to assault the city. This prompted, I guess, the 6th flight of Emperor Yongli at this point. Qi was urging the emperor to stay as Zhao came rushing from Pingel to help, but Qing forces blocked his route to Guilin. Qi urged the emperor, "Victory or defeat is still unsure, but if your plan is to run away, then how can this place not be in danger?" Emperor Yongli replied this: "Surely my minister does not want to see the altar of state and grain perish." Well, Qi tried to gather forces and calm things down to defend Guilin as the enemy approached, while Zhao kept fighting to get to the city. Soon Zhao found himself surrounded and fought his way with spear in hand very courageously, buying enough time for the Ming commander Hu Yiqing to show up from the east, joining the fight with his cavalry. It is said Hu Yiqing had his horses' manes clipped in such a way that the Qing thought they were riding bulls, and proclaimed, "This bull-riding monster is not easy to stand up against." The cavalry of Hu Yiqing managed to smash the Qing force, sending them fleeing for several miles. Despite all of this, Emperor Yongli continued to flee all the way to Nanning, much to the outrage of Qi, who screamed, "How can you flee every time the wind blows 200 li away? How can the people take heart if their leader is so tremulous?" His words really had no effect on the emperor. In only 18 months, Emperor Yongli had traveled over 1,800 miles across 3 provinces, spending no more than 4 months in any given place. This led to waves of defections, and the court of Emperor Yongli began to discuss where would be the best place to set up a base of operation. Despite the flights of Emperor Yongli, in 1648 the Ming had some major successes. Ma Xianzhong took back Changde, He Tongjia took back Quanzhou, and this drove many to the Ming cause. Even Yangzhou was taken back after a 3-month siege. Riding the wave of victories, the Ming took Hangzhou, and they began to capture valuable supplies, horses, and other war materials. This all forced Qi to yet again urge Emperor Yongli to go back to Guilin, and this time to make it his capital. Qi reasoning was quite sound. Guilin was centrally located, in a resource-rich area along a river. It was easy to communicate with other sectors and coordinate offensive campaigns. But time and time again, Emperor Yongli refused, and this had a very damaging effect on morale. Soon Ming commanders recaptured Xianzhong and Yichang, and this led Emperor Yongli to feel more secure, enough to return to Jiaqing, which he hoped to turn into his base of operation. At this point, Emperor Yongli and many in his court thought that the Ming restoration was truly possible, and they now sought to push north of the Yangtze to seize Nanjing and Kewang. Soon Kuang had opened up negotiations with the regime, and it was expected that he could be relied upon. Qi, for his part, argued that now they could push east from Sichuan and north, cutting Qing supply lines from Huguang. Things would all take a very dramatic turn for the worse, however. One of the Ming commanders, Li Qixian, who was a former commander under Li Zicheng, had been continuously stating in public that Li Zicheng was the former emperor, making quite a bit of trouble. Li Qixian then requested permission to take Changsha and Yuezhou on his own. He managed to defeat the Qing commander Xianzhong and marched north to assault Changsha, where Xianzhong had retreated. He killed thousands, captured boats, horses, and other war materials, and word spread of his great success. However, the people of Changsha did not see Li Qixian as their liberator. In fact, they threw their lot in with Xianzhong to defend their city. Let us not forget, Li Qixian, like many other former commanders of the Dashun or Daxi bandit armies, had a reputation, of course. So who knows what the populace really thought of him? Thus, Li Qixian's command boat, when approaching the city, was struck by a cannonball, and he lost over 1,000 men. Xianzhong was hit by an arrow, but this did not stop him from rallying the defense of the city atop the walls. Li kept up the pressure with his siege ladders, artillery, and sabers. But Xianzhong likewise fired arrows and cannons down upon the enemy and led men into the tunnels to attack the Ming sabers, costing Li Qixian some 1,000 men. Then Xianzhong sent secret attacks with boats on the Xiang River, and they hit Li's flanks, forcing him to retreat. When Li Qixian was defeated at Changsha, he was ordered to simply move on and relieve forces at Nanchang. But he ended up only going as far as Jialing, where he hunkered down. In the meantime, the two Ming commanders, Du Yingxi and He Tangjiao, were forming plans in Xiantan. Du Yingxi decided he would head east to rescue Jiangxi, while He Tangjiao would try to go to Nanjing, linking up with other Ming Loyalists there. As part of their campaigns, Li Qixian was appointed Vice Minister of War and Supreme Commander of Shandong and Yunnan, while other commanders received supreme commands all over the place. But nothing came of these appointments, as the Qing quickly advanced and hit He Tangjiao as he was departing from Xiangtan. He tried desperately to find allies to help him out, but none could do anything. Thus, Prince Jiahalang was able to defeat He, and he took him as a hostage. Prince Jiahalang knew He Tangjiao had quite a lot of military capability, and he spent many days trying to get He to defect, but it was to no avail. Eventually, Prince Jiahalang ordered his execution, or He committed suicide. No report is sure of his fate. When He Tangjiao was dead, many of his men fled to join Qi at Guilin. Another issue, however, was the countless loyal and true who were under He Tangjiao's command. Since his death, they were now without any semblance of order. Bandits will be bandits, and soon they were looting and pillaging everywhere. The Qing soon besieged Nanchang and took it for a short time, thus dramatically collapsing the Ming's control over Huguang. Many Ming commanders defected to the Qing, and Emperor Yongli put Qi in charge of defending the Huguang-Jiangxi Guangdong corridor. But at this point, the Qing held the Fujian coast and much of Huguang. By 1649, Li Qixian's troops began to scatter and plunder the areas as the Qing pursued them. Eventually, Li's forces plundered their way back north, earning the moniker White Felt Bandits for the way that they dressed. It was hoped by the Ming that they could still coerce Li Qixian and his White Felt Bandits to return back into the fold. But Li Qixian would die of illness in Guangxi in the late year. The White Felt Bandits soon scattered off and began pillaging under new commanders, mostly in Huguang and Sichuan province. As the Ming forces collapsed at Yongzhou in late 1649, Qi said in anguish, For 2 years, I've tried to create a bulwark, and in a single morning, everything has collapsed. How can it be believed that heaven is for the Ming? With the death of He Tongjiao and the absolute collapse of the South Ming's regime position in Kuang, Emperor Yongli, you guessed it, fled Zhao for Wuzhou in early 1650. Thus, the South Ming regime was barely a thing in Kuang anymore. Now, Qi Shishi began begging the emperor to stay in Zhaoqing, stating, Yuedong has lots of rivers alongside mountains. Even good cavalry cannot unite in the wilderness to attack there. Since the time of Li Chengdong returned to the allegiance, this has been a secure area. Its resources and tax base are abundant, 10 times that of USC, and both competent officials and troops north and south are connected, and we can strengthen ourselves from within and defend ourselves from outside enemies. Moreover, Zhaoqing is 1,000 li from Shaoxing, with stout crossbows mounted on the walls and entrenched brigades in defense. We can wait for royal rescue troops to come from the 4 directions. Wherever we can go, the bandits can go as well. Although the realm is vast, there is only one boundary. If we retreat an inch, we lose an inch. If we retreat a foot, we lose a foot. Now if the court hears of danger and climbs aboard a boat in the middle of the night, where can you go? As you've probably already guessed, Emperor Yongli did not listen and he continued his flight. You gotta imagine the job of Qi Shishi. This poor guy has to just chase after this cowardly emperor for years. Well, the Qing commander, Kang Youde, remember that guy all the way back from the first episodes? Well, he sent Qi Shishi a letter trying to get him to surrender. Kang Youde had been battling the loyal and true throughout the southwest, smashing many of their armies. Qi allegedly burnt the letter and killed the messenger. Meanwhile, back in Sichuan, Sun Kuang had begun his own program of state building and was beginning to ask the South Ming regime to install him as a Ming prince. Following in his former master's gruesome footsteps, Sun looted Guizhou and severed hands, ears, and noses of those who resisted. Apparently only 30% of the populace was left alive. Sun set to work training his troops for months, made deals with local cities to establish economic relations, all while simultaneously harassing local Ming armies. His forces eventually captured the provincial capital of Guilin and its surrounding area, and he soon began to set up a new entire regime. But just as Sun was settling down, he received word of an extraordinary opportunity unfolding in Yunnan. Thus he and his dynasty commanders marched southwest, entering Yunnan, entering a new dawn for all of them. The collapse of the Ming dynasty at Beijing and that of the Hongguang South Ming regime in Nanjing had led the people of Yunnan to revolt against their former Ming leaders. Yunnan was one of the very last places conquered by the Ming dynasty in the late 14th century, and it remained relatively the same as it had done prior. It had a huge aboriginal population governed by chieftains in a system called the Tulsi system. Yunnan thus always felt a bit like a quasi-feudal state controlled by the strongest chieftains. Once the Ming dynasty fell, the chieftains began to fight another for dominance. The chieftain family that had the largest influence historically because of, well, their relationship with the Ming royal family was known as the Mu clan. The Mu clan was pretty oppressive to the people, and even more so when the Ming collapsed. When Hongguang's regime fell, most in Yunnan began to view the Mu clan as being weak, and many others began to attack them. One clan, the Wu clan, to make this all sound even more confusing, was rising to prominence at the time and challenged the Mu clan. The Wu clan had limited military power, and the Mu quelled their challenge fairly easily, but the challenge simply encouraged more and more clans to rise up, and soon a leader named Sha Dingzhou used the opportunity. Sha was a military officer for a chieftain who died, and Shah managed to get a stronghold over his clan. While the Mu and Wu fought, Shah began a campaign that extended to the Vietnamese border. Then Shah tried a coup against the Mu after they had quelled the Wu. Shah's forces stormed the Mu palace and burnt it down, killing many in the capital of Yunnan. This began a war between Shah and the Mu clan for several months, while Shah gained control of East Yunnan. However, the Mu clan's forces and other chieftains were fighting a war of attrition, and likely would win. Thus, Shah sought external help. Shah Dingzhou sent a letter to Sun Kuang inviting him to come and rescue Yunnan in 1647. Because that's what any intelligent person would do. Invite a bandit that had served under one of the biggest psychopaths in all of history to come and save your province, with an army of bandits. As you can imagine, this was a very big mistake. Sun Kuang claimed to be the brother-in-law to Mu Tianbo, and he declared he would avenge his sister's family. Thus, Sun Kuang showed up with 100,000 battle-hardened veterans who saw a force of just a few thousand disorganized local units under Shah's command. Sun Kuang defeated Shah's army easily and piled corpses in the streets of the first city that he took, immersing the city in apparently 3 to 4 inches of blood, so it is said. Sun then took Jiang, a city he expected to simply open the gates and submit to him, as he had just massacred a previous city, sending fear throughout the region. They chose to not submit and fired cannons upon the invaders. Soon, Sun's men tossed up clouds of ladders and swarmed over the walls of Jiang like ants. Sun's men rounded up all those in the city and severed their hands. Sun then ordered his fellow adopted brothers, Liu Wenqiu to the west and Li Dingguo to the east, to kill all those who would not submit. Shah Dingzhou tried to send armies to attack the invaders wherever he could, but every army was defeated with ease. Shah would put on a show of confidence in front of his armies, but secretly he was pulling out his hair, knowing that Sun would soon take his province. Sun eventually marched on Yunnanfu and smashed the Shah army defending it, but rather than immediately occupying the city, Sun Kuang instead announced that he was going to restore the Jiao clan, that being his sister's clan, who was married to a Mu husband. By this point, Liu Wenqiu and Li Dingguo had spread a ton of fear into the populace with their campaigns in the east. Despite Yunnanfu having a tiny garrison within it, the city was simply falling apart because of low supplies, as Sun Kuang's army simply surrounded and waited it out. Thus, after just a few months, the gates of Yunnanfu opened up and Sun's forces entered the city. Soon, Sun Kuang began to proclaim all those who fled the city should come back, or they would be killed as rebels. All of the wives within Yunnanfu who lost husbands were given to Sun's men. How very nice of him. You know, it goes without saying that women had it bad for most history. Then he began to force the children to work, cutting grass and collecting firewood. Girls of the age of 10 and up were forced into drama troupes. Some put into brothels. Boys of 12 to 20 years of age were castrated. The adult men were killed, and their bodies were tossed into the wilderness. Many former Ming officials were killed, or they themselves just committed suicide. To restore a semblance of order, Sun began practices employed by Zhang Xianzhong, such as prohibited fires at night amongst many other rules which could earn a citizen of Yunnanfu a beating or execution depending on the rule. Yunnanfu basically became Chengde 2.0, but perhaps not nearly as bad. Then Sun sent his armies to scour the countryside of the city, killing many. It was estimated that perhaps half the population of Yunnanfu was dead. It was even alleged that coffin makers ran out of wood in Yunnanfu. That is never a good sign. Many homes around the city had to be razed to make space for Sun's new training grounds, and any who resisted were killed. Sun eventually established order through fear, but realized that in Yunnan you required the support of the Tulsi system to truly control the province. So, he soon began to establish relations with all the chieftains. Those who resisted, of course, were threatened or killed. Sun then began calling himself Ping Dongwang, prince who pacifies the East, which was met with animosity from his adoptive brothers. Sun began to place royal titles on everyone, but kept his position elevated from that of his adoptive brothers, who were all supposed to be equal. The three other brothers all recognized Sun Kuang nominally as the leader, but had all agreed they should have equal rankings. Li Dingguo began to argue they should all be equal, as things were with Zhang Xianzhong, which angered Sun. So Sun then publicly punished Li Dingguo, though Liu Wenxiu and Ai Nangqi would manage to get the punishment lightened. Regardless, Li Dingguo was livid, stating this: "We are brothers. How dare you strike me? Since the death of our father, we have been like hands and feet with no ruler amongst us. Yet now, we are to honor you as a superior? If this is how things are going to be from now on, how can we live together in peace?" It is alleged Sun went to Li in private and told him he had to do it publicly because if not, there would have been a mutiny. Sun then tried to make amends with Li, tasking him with hunting down and killing Sha Dingzhou, who was on the run. Sha had run to Yunnan and held out against the forces of Liu Wenxiu for quite a few months. When Li Dingguo's forces showed up, the defenders of Yunnan showered them with gunfire. But Li, being a veteran commander, easily broke their walls in no time using gunpowder. Sha's forces were shocked by the speed and efficiency of Li's army as they quickly overwhelmed the city. It is said the entire city was torched in a single day, and that 78,000 people were massacred, which is pretty incredible. I kind of doubt these numbers. Sha and his family managed to escape to a nearby town called Ami. After the massacre at Yunnan, Li Dingguo was noted to not again perform such horrible acts against civilians. It seems he was trying to build himself up a bit of a reputation afterwards, so that he wouldn't look like Zhang Xianzhong or Sun Kuang. In early 1648, Li Dingguo surrounded the town of Ami, cutting it off from its water supply. After 20 days, the defenders with Sha Dingzhou ran out of water, and Li began sapping Ami's walls. Li then invited Sha to a fake banquet, making it seem like he would allow Sha to defect and take up a grand position in a new regime. The effect led many of the defenders to defect, who soon simply opened the gates to Li's men. Li was brought to Sha and his family, and instead of the grand banquet that he had promised, he had the entire household brought to Yunnanfu and flayed alive. Li's successes were extravagant, showing his extreme capability as a military leader. Unfortunately, they also bolstered Li Dingguo as a great leader, and Sun Kuang began to become quite jealous of this. Once Sun Kuang's army had secured enough food to sustain themselves for a year, they began government building efforts. Taxes began, agricultural reform, mines were opened, weapons manufacturing, the works. The weather proved great during that year, and the harvest did very well. Mines produced salt, gold, silver, iron, and copper, and the faith in the government rose up rather quickly. In fact, Sun had done better than some of the former Ming officials had in the past, and he soon began to mint coins, print paper notes, and opened new roads, which all helped reduce conflict in the province. Within a year, Sun's government was gathering much praise, and the people were quite content. Things were really looking good, and Sun began to explore the idea of formally uniting with the Ming dynasty to resist the Qing. Sun had also heard reports about how well the loyal and true bandits were doing under the new Ming regime, and he thought to himself that his regime might benefit from this same relationship. This would help Sun and his inner circle gain legitimacy, at a time when it looked like the Ming were doing quite well. However, old dogs can't learn too many new tricks, and Sun's administration still held some of Zhang Xianzhong's favorite pastime activities, like harsh punishments such as decapitation, flaying, and flogging. Though Sun disregarded the policy of rewarding soldiers for body parts. Well, so at least there was that. But Sun Kuang was not content. He continued to make it more apparent that his position was more and more elevated compared to his adoptive brothers. He began to erect an ancestral temple for Zhang Xianzhong and referred to him as Taizu, linking himself to Zhang. Then he asked Emperor Yongli to invest him with a Ming title, that of Prince of Blood, Qin Wang. Ai Nangqi was perplexed by this, and he said, "I can name myself Prince. What's the point?" Li Dingguo also added, "We haven't conquered an inch of territory, so how can we accept entitlements from the court?" Sun explained to them that only an investor from the Ming court was legitimate, and that after he was invested with that title, they would all refer to him as Your Highness. As you can imagine, this would most certainly help Sun alleviate himself over another rising star, Li Dingguo, who was highly popular as a field commander. Li was appointed with the major responsibility of training the troops, and he was noted to share the hardships with the men and always led from the front, gaining their respect. Li was what you would call a soldier's soldier. Li Dingguo soon established 5 rules for his army. Don't kill people, don't commit arson, don't commit rape, don't steal livestock, and don't take money from peasants. Given how soldiers usually acted in this time period in history, the response of the regular populace was ecstasy. In the summer of 1649, Sun dispatched his court official, Yang Weiju, as his emissary to Yongli's court, to ask for the investiture of the Prince of Qin and offer to fight the Qing on their behalf. By this time, Sun had relocated his operations to Guizhou as it was more centrally located, leaving Li Dingguo in Yunnan to train the military. For Emperor Yongli's court, the request was quite disturbing. To make Sun a blood prince might put him in line for the throne. Many in the Ming court had no illusions about Sun Kuang. They thought he was trying to vie for the dragon throne himself. And they were absolutely right. I mean, come on. The title of Prince of Qin was normally reserved for the royal family. The court was divided. Qu Shishi called for Sun's execution. Many argued Sun was nothing more than a bandit. But they were in a terrible situation, suffering many military defeats at the hands of the Qing. Eventually, the court consented to giving Sun a lesser title, that of the Duke of Jingguo. Yang Weiju was terrified of relaying the response to Sun, who might simply execute him for failing to get the title Sun wanted, and made a stop at Wuzhou before returning to Guizhou. In Wuzhou, Yang met with Du Yingxi, who advised him to simply forge a document to make Sun think he received a better title than what he had been given. Thus, with Du Yingxi's help, they forged a document stating Sun was invested with the title of Prince of Pingalao. Meanwhile, another official in the Ming court forged another document stating Sun was being invested with the title of Prince of Qin, the title he originally asked for. Turns out that official, Chen Bangfu, wanted to curry favor with Sun. All of this was done without the awareness of Yongli's court, of course. Thus, the first to arrive in Guizhou was the envoy with Chen Bangfu's forgery, and Sun was absolutely delighted upon seeing it. Then, Yang Weiju showed up with his forgery of that of Prince of Pingalao, enraging Sun Kuang. Then, yes, as you might imagine, a real envoy from Yongli's court arrived, and Sun found out the truth, that he had actually received the title of Duke of Jingguo. And that really pissed him off. To add insult to injury, his 3 adoptive brothers were also given titles by that same envoy of Emperor Yongli. In his rage, Sun sent more emissaries to Emperor Yongli, who offered him the title of Prince of Yi, but Sun refused this, demanding the title he originally requested. In the meantime, Ai Nangqi died as a result of a poisoned crossbow bolt, while he was pacifying a rebellious region. It is alleged he had been ambushed in a forest and his army was significantly battered. He had managed to return to Yunnan, but the doctors could do little to stop the poison. His army was handed over to Sun Kuang's command, significantly increasing his power. And thus the first of the adoptive children of Zhang Xianzhong was dead, and he would not be the last. Now, all the way back in Sichuan, the struggle raged on between the Ming Loyalists and the Qing. The Qing had sent commander Li Guoying into Sichuan on a pacification campaign, and as he entered the wasteland that was once Sichuan, he said, "For 1,000 li, there is no smoke from cooking fires, and on account of the depredations of the bandit gangs, the value of rice is greater than that of pearls." His forces occupied Baoning in northern Sichuan, where he was attacked multiple times by bandit armies such as the Quedong bandits, Tanhang, and others. Li eventually rode out of Baoning and attacked the bandit armies fast and hard, sending them fleeing into the countryside. Soon his army took Xianzhong, and he began to stockpile up supplies in preparation for a gradual march south. In the spring of 1647, he marched into Chengde and lamented at the ghastly scene. He said to those around him, "Chengde has been down a hard road. Where are all of the people?" Bones were strewn everywhere. There was no sign of life to be seen. He was given reports that the people of Chengde had first fled to Yazhou and ate grass and wild plants until they starved so much they had to resort to cannibalism. Li left Zhang Disheng as commander of Chengde, which must have been the worst appointment ever. But soon his troops starved, killed their commander, and fled back north. Li got a report that 1,330 of the 1,390 men assigned to Zhang Disheng died of starvation or disease. Wow. Even Li himself was quite ill through 1647 to 1648, and he was hampered by bandit attacks and a very stretched supply line. Reports flooded in that every fortress was ridden with hundreds of sick and starving troops. All of the garrisons the Qing commander would set up in Sichuan amounted to just a few hundred starving men. The starvation did not allow him to perform a sufficient offensive. The situation became so dire, most of the Qing forces had to withdraw from Sichuan, with a meager force left occupying Baoning. It was not just the starvation and disease alone they had to worry about. Anywhere the Qing set up shop, bandit armies emerged to harass them. Later on in 1650, the pacification commissioner of Sichuan, Zhang Chun, made a report that gives quite a lot of insight. He began by describing Sichuan as a den of tigers, and that of Yaohuang bandits. One could travel for a great distance without seeing any smoke from cooking fires. Boy, we heard that one a lot. He estimated that 2 to 3% of the population in Sichuan was left alive. He laid blame upon the destruction caused by the Yaohuang bandits, while leaving out the Qing's actions, and goes on to talk about man-eating tigers found everywhere. People in Sichuan were terrified to travel just because of tiger attacks. He claimed in one district, a previous population of 506, 228 of them were killed by tigers. 55 died of illness, and 223 were left alive. He ended that report stating, "Many people escaped the clutches of bandits, only to end up in the mouths of tigers." I am here just trying to imagine you're a person in Sichuan. You just survived the horrors of Zhang Xianzhong, then the war between the Qing and the Ming, and now you gotta worry about tigers. Just tigers everywhere. That's crazy. Li Guoying immediately began demanding assistance, and the Qing Emperor Shenzhi began to promise supplies would be on their way from places like Shanxi. But all the supplies were quickly used up. and Li still had little in terms of soldiers. Li kept arguing that his enemies grew larger in Sichuan and his forces were growing smaller. The problem was the supplies and men quickly starved and got sick because there was no foundation within Sichuan to feed them. Basically, it was like putting band-aids upon more band-aids for a large wound that needed a doctor to fix it. Thus, the situation forced Li to develop a new plan, which was Tuantian. To nourish the troops, soothe the people, and allow for both offensive and defensive warfare. He sent the Qing officials into the countryside to investigate and promote agricultural productivity. As for his army, he sent them throughout the north and east of Sichuan, killing and capturing thousands of bandit armies, many part of the Yaohuang bandits. But like always, bandits could run and hide in the mountains, and that's just what they did. It was estimated by Li that up to 100,000 Yaohuang bandits could be in Sichuan. By 1649, Li was promoted to Minister of War and Vice Censor-in-Chief of the Right, with jurisdiction over the armies of Sichuan. He had multiple victories. One was dislodging Liu Wenxiu from Changqing, where he killed many dashi. If you remember way back when, Emperor Yongli dispatched a distant family member named Zhu Rongfan to Sichuan in 1647. It did not take long for Zhu Rongfan to begin parading around as the Prince of Chu. This, of course, was a lie, but it didn't stop him from amassing 100,000 followers, forming a base in Guizhou. His forces fought the Qing and scored quite a few victories, but in reality they were just a bunch of opportunistic bandits. Then Zhu Rongfan picked a fight with a Ming Loyalist commander named Zhang. Yes, he was still around. And this brought a lot of Ming attention. As you might have guessed, he was preparing to proclaim himself as emperor, as one does, and so the South Ming officials began to investigate the situation. When pressed by them, Zhu claimed to be acting on behalf of Emperor Yongli, and that he was merely suppressing bandits. But of course, they accused him of trying to claim himself as the heir apparent, despite not being a prince of blood. Zhu then tried to make a getaway, but he was caught by other officials in 1649 and he was executed. Meanwhile, the situation in Sichuan kept growing worse and worse. Just because the tyrant Zhang Xianzhong was dead did not mean his lasting effects on the province were gone. Not by a long shot. In the midst of the war between bandits, Qing and Ming, the common people were starving and dying. Rice was selling at unbelievably inflated rates. Dogs ate human flesh and lurked in city streets. Most cities were empty because tigers and wolves were prowling them. It was reported that bandits were robbing graves and that people were resorting to cannibalism en masse. Many people fled to mountains, away from the threat of other people or tigers. Lighting a fire became something of a death sentence, inviting anyone to attack you. Disgusting euphemisms began to be said because of all the cannibalism going on, such as xia geng, poor man's broth, yang ra, surplus lamb, and gu yang, scorched bones. On top of the famine were terrible diseases, of which there were many. One was called Big Head Plague, and it was called this because apparently one's head erupted in red boils. It was also associated with the chills, fever, swelling of the head and neck, and it was very contagious. There was also a similar disease known as frog fever, where the boils were more so on the shoulders and back. Then there was horse eye, a sickness when one's eye became big and yellow. It is also assumed the Qing had brought smallpox with them, and that this was infesting the south. Yeesh. By autumn of 1649, most of north and western Sichuan was pacified, and a quarter of the province was under nominal control of the Qing. In southern Sichuan, the South Ming Loyalists, Zhang, had held control for quite a while, aided greatly by the hoard of treasure he had salvaged from Zhang Xianzhong's naval catastrophe in 1646. He was capable of feeding his own troops, and thousands of refugees who stormed over to him. Yet despite all of this good fortune, he had to contest with the warlords in Sichuan, named Li Qianda, Wu Dading, and Yuan Tao. The three warlords invited Yang to a banquet. It's always a banquet, isn't it? And yep, they poisoned him with wine. Typical. After killing Yang, they divided his treasure and troops, and southern Sichuan yet again fell into pure chaos. Now, while all this is going down, word spread, and Sun Kuang, similar to how he took the opportunity with Yunnan's turmoil, came storming back to Sichuan when he heard that the south was fractured. Sun, seeking to put further pressure on Emperor Yongli to invest him with the title of Prince of Qin, sent Liu Wenxiu and Bai Wenxian with 200,000 troops to avenge Yang Jian. Sun's forces made quick work of the warlords and bandit leaders in southern Sichuan, taking several cities. Yuan and Wu were captured and sent back to Sun, who mocked them, saying he would enroll them as regular soldiers in his army. Wu actually did end up serving in Sun's military, and for quite a long time. Yuan, however, managed to escape and was caught later by Liu Wenxiu, who killed him. Li Qianda drowned himself when Liu Wenxiu caught him too. Sun's forces killed countless warlords, bandit leaders, and such. Now remember, Sun was coming from Yunnan. His army had with him a certain type of cavalry unit, elephants. Many simply submitted to Sun Kuang, joining forces rather than trying to fight him. Meanwhile, Li Guoying had initially profited heavily from the death of Yang Jian, but saw with horror that the forces of Sun Kuang were sweeping through the province like a swarm. Li Guoying pleaded with Emperor Shenzhi for more troops to combat the warlord in the south, and he was promised a mix of Han and Manchu troops under the control of Wu Sangui. Yet even with the extra forces, now the loyal and true, the Guidong bandits, the Yaohuang bandits, and just simply other groups were flocking to Sun Kuang's banner, and soon the south of Sichuan was just a minefield of trouble. Sun asserted his control from Guizhou and began building it up similar to what he did in Yunnan, and in short time, the southwest of Sichuan became an armed camp designed specifically to resist the Qing. Kang Yude was made prince in charge of rectifying the south in 1649, and alongside the Manchu prince, Jia Halang, both were dispatched, and in 1650 they took Longhu, Wugang, and Qingzhou. Through their efforts, they took 50,000 surrendered Ming troops and many officers, and moved to take Quanzhou, and then they entered Guangxi. Zhu Shixu tried desperately to rally the troops to defend her Guilin, but all efforts were in vain, and no significant numbers came. Zhu refused to leave, as all of his colleagues urged him to do so. In November of 1650, Kang Yude's army surrounded Guilin. To help defend the city, Zhu Shixu was aided by the Ming official Zhang, who had served the Xiaowu emperor and aided in defeating Zhu Rongfan. Apparently, he had a kind of Fu Manchu-styled mustache, was loved and respected by his men for being fearless in battle. When Zhang arrived, Zhu said to him, "I have been entrusted with staying to defend Guilin, so I should die here. Those without such responsibilities can flee. The frontier has already been lost. How can I think of easily fleeing?" Zhang replied that he was impressed, and he called Zhu a true gentleman, requesting permission to die alongside him, saying, "If it's to be death, then we die together." Zhu was delighted, and the two shared wine. Zhu gave his seals of office to another official to send to Emperor Yongli. So it was kind of like a bromance. Kang Yude repeatedly offered Zhu and Zhang the chance to defect, but both men kept refusing. Kang Yude even wined and dined them, trying to win them over, but it was to no avail. Zhang spat back at Kang Yude. "You are no more than a dog or a sheep. You disgrace the former sage, and you deserve to die for your crimes. You're nothing more than the slave who used to carry a bedpan in Mao Wenlong's house. How dare you sully the name of the sage?" Well, for this, Zhang's feet were severed, but Kang Yude still did not kill him. He kept insisting the Qing were better for all, and gave stories of his 20 years as a soldier. Then Kang tried to have their own family members come and talk some sense into them, but still to no avail. Both men were eventually imprisoned, and wrote depressing and fatalistic poems during their captivity before being executed outside the windy cave at the foot of the Celestial Crane Peak, in what is now today called Jietaishan, the Folded Brocade Hill. It's a public park. Kang Yude allowed proper burials for the two, and soon took up residence in the mansion of the former prince Jiahalang. Now Guilin and nearby Pingle were in the Qing hands. Kang Yude sought to secure Guangxi by 1651, but he was still itching to face Sun Kuang in the west. In the wake of Qu and Zhang's death, Emperor Yongli fled to Nanning. Yep. With a more vulnerable Emperor Yongli now in Nanning, Sun Kuang saw an opportunity to establish greater control over him. Sun Kuang sent him welcoming parties, offering him military protection, and boasted of how powerful and wonderful he was. After annoying Yongli enough, he was finally invested as Prince of Qin, though he had already taken to calling himself Guozhu, ruler of the realm, and he had been making appointments on his own authority at Guiyang. Once a bandit, always a bandit, as they say. He was absolutely delighted by the news, and renamed Yunnan Fu Kunming, and Yunnan as Yunxing Province. Then he dubbed his personal troops the Jiaqianjun, the Royal Vanguard. Li Dingguo and Liao Wenxiu retained their old titles and sat at Sun's left and right, begrudgingly. Young Weizhi, the poor guy who had to bear bad news and was punished harshly for it, managed to become Grand Secretary at Emperor Yongli's court, and he would subsequently try to impeach Sun Kuang. Bold strategy, Cotton. See if it pans out for him. Sun Kuang responded by having his thugs bring Yang back to Guiyang, and upon his arrival screamed, "Treacherous bandits like you will never be anything else." Sun had Yang beaten and dragged through the streets, and he was trampled to death by horses. His loss was actually felt quite heavily by many, particularly by Li Dingguo and Liao Wenxiu, who had become close friends with the man. They both took his corpse and buried him with a ceremony. With Yang well out of the way, Sun began to construct an imperial palace in Guiyang, and he used imperial forms of address in his decrees and instructions. Any officials who resisted him were trampled to death by horses. Only Liao Wenxiu and Li Dingguo were exempt from calling Sun Guozhu. He minted his own coins and constructed more ancestral temples, making further links to Xianzhong, which should have startled people. Sun then declared his state the later Ming regime. His ascension ceremony was attended by 100 officials on July the 3rd of 1651. Meanwhile, the Qing captured Pingle and Xingyuan, as well as other towns along the Huguang-Gangxi border. Jialian was captured by the Qing, who tried to persuade him to join them, but he opted for suicide. Emperor Yongli, feeling pressured, you're not going to believe it, but yes, he fled Nanning. This time, he and his court debated whether they should flee to Fujian or Vietnam. Most wanted to go east, arguing they should join up forces with Sun Kuang. But Emperor Yongli thought the coast was too distant and the travel might be too dangerous. For the time being, he wanted to camp at Xixing. But as the Qing took Nanning, Emperor Yongli fled again. My God. But he was almost caught this time by the Qing, who were just within a few miles of his entourage. This prompted Emperor Yongli to accept Sun Kuang's offer of protection. Thus, at the beginning of 1652, Sun ordered his subordinate, Geng Sangping, with 3,000 troops to escort Emperor Yongli to Anlong. By the time Emperor Yongli arrived, his entourage was down to 2,900 members. Sun figured the location was convenient for the court of Yongli, as it lay in conjunction with Yunnan, Guizhou, and Guangdong provinces. It was also close enough to Guiyang for Sun to keep an eye on the emperor. Sun then set himself up as Yongli's military protector, but refused to personally greet Yongli on the principle that, quote, "Two dragons cannot see another." And thus, Anglong became the ostensible Ming capital, but in reality it was just a safe place where Sun Kuang could keep Emperor Yongli under house arrest, while he pursued his own objectives. I would like to take this time to remind all of you that this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Please go subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube and continue to help us produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. And hey, if you don't already know this, we have a other podcast by yours truly, the Pacific War podcast week by week, so check it out if you're interested in that. But if you're still hungry for some more History of Asia content, you can also check out my personal channel, the Pacific War channel, over at YouTube, where I cover the history of China and Japan going as far back as the Opium Wars of the 1800s all the way up to the end of the Pacific War in 1945. Check it out, it means a lot to me. So the great and horrifying father, Xianzhong, is dead, but his 4 adoptive sons quickly took over the family business and are causing mayhem. Sun Kuang emerged the largest brother and soon built himself an empire, matching that of the fleeing Emperor Yongli. Now, Sun Kuang had Emperor Yongli basically under house arrest, or better said, kidnapped. All was for the taking. What stood in his way but the might of the Qing dynasty?